as we all know, Nintendo has won the console war, and this goes completely against the narrative that's been established since the 90s. The idea that Nintendo was failing, that they're going out of business, that they can't succeed, that PC gaming is going to take over. Let's just ignore mobile and Nintendo and just pretend that PC gaming is somehow relevant, that there's some healthy ecosystem of PC exclusive games that exist that drive PC sales, and that it's not just people just fleeing the ever declining PlayStation and Xbox platforms. Let's just pretend that PC is the master race and ignore the two far more popular and successful platforms, Nintendo and mobile. Let's just ignore all of that and try to gaslight people into thinking that Nintendo is failing, that they can't possibly succeed, that somehow PC gaming is superior, and let's call ourselves Grummz, okay? Like, this is the big Kamehameha cope coming from like the PC master race right now, because Xbox and PlayStation are done, they're finished, they're not coming back, and Nintendo obviously won the console war. Obviously. But this goes completely against the narrative and the agenda of people like Grummz, who desperately wanted PC gaming to win. So, what do they do? How do they deny the success of Nintendo? How do they deny the success of the movies, the merchandise, the video games? Like, what do? They sit there and they try and tell you with a straight face that Nintendo is not a console, it's a mobile platform, because the Switch is not a real video game platform. This is the same kind of semantic nonsense you've been hearing since forever, okay? It's why the Game Boy wasn't seen as being like as doing better than the PS1. It's why the Wii isn't considered to have won the console war against the PS360. It's why people pretend the 3DS and the Switch don't matter, and now we're seeing it with the Switch too. Nintendo isn't a video game console, it's a mobile platform, and this is just nothing but semantics, especially when they turn around and they try and say that, like, well, actually, back in the day, Nintendo had a console and a handheld, and now they only have one. Their business is clearly declining, completely ignoring, like, the reality of the situation is that, like, the Switch platforms merged, and now we have the Switch 1 and Switch 2 coexisting together, the 3DS and the Switch 1 coexisting for a good chunk of its lifespan. Like, the reality of the situation is that Nintendo platforms are very, very successful. They're not going anywhere. And yet, like, the grifters just can't bring themselves to admit it. They are sitting there coping and seething about the reality of the situation. They are genuinely upset that Nintendo continues to do well. And it's interesting when you compare it to, like, how Grummz acts in regards to AAA slop, in which, he has all these points and he, like, talks about, like, why, PlayStation lost their way and how they did this, and how they fell off. With Nintendo, every single time he's, like, arguing semantics. He's saying things like this, like, well, Nintendo just they're not as good as they used to be. Like, okay, well, what Nintendo games have you played? What consoles do you own? What's your favorite game, like, franchise? Like, what could they do more to improve? Like, you notice this a lot with these people, is that they're very, very vague about what Nintendo is doing wrong. And it really does just come down to the fact that these people are not fans. They never were fans. They don't know anything about the company or the games or the franchises or, like, anything about it. But they really do think just sitting there and telling you that, like, Nintendo was only successful because their fans are so loyal, like, they really think that's going to work. And it's kind of sidestepping the actual reality of the situation, like, why the fans are so loyal. And the reason why we are so loyal is because the games have been consistently good since the very beginning. Nintendo is and has established itself as the highest quality brand in the gaming community. And even at this late stage failure of PlayStation, Xbox, and their third-party partners, you're still seeing Grummz sitting there and just trying to gaslight you into thinking that, like, indie games are going to be bigger than Nintendo. That, like, that Blizzard, that, like, that these that Ghost of Your Toy, that these minor obscure gacha waifu games are gonna somehow like destroy Nintendo, and it's just not gonna happen. I can't begin to tell you how many times like I was told that like Nikkei's better than anything Nintendo produces. Like, I'll put $500 into it for a skin, so my female character will have slightly less clothes. Like, I remember hearing that over and over and over again, and then recently realized that Pokemon Masters, which is the Pokemon Gacha spin-off game, that is actually better produced, higher quality, and just more fun to play than Nikkei is. So like your entire giant cope that like, well, mobile gaming is going to stop Nintendo because of sexy female characters, that's completely imploded. That's not going to go anywhere. That's kind of the reality we're seeing with these copes right now, is that how exactly is Nintendo going to fail when pretty much every major brand that people throw up against them just completely collapses? The PC thing is such a cope because the idea is that, like, well, it's open source and I can just pirate everything so I can get everything for free. So it's a better deal than Nintendo. Like, completely omitting, the initial cost of obtaining a PC, of having to protect it from viruses, of having to get all your equipment to, the fact that you can't even get Nintendo games on there legally, like, it is more cost effective to simply just buy a Switch 2, is the reality of it. Like, traditionally people like PC gamers have gaslit um gamers into thinking that emulation is the easiest way to get a hold of old games, but first of all, that's illegal, and second of all, no, it's not. Um like the Nintendo Classic system and the eShop makes it easier than ever to get a hold of older games. I'm playing through Tales of Symphonia right now. I'll be playing Luigi's Mansion on Switch tonight. I'm awaiting the release of Pokemon Coliseum and Pokemon XD. Like, there are so many games I'm looking forward to on Nintendo platforms, on Nintendo Classics, that like I don't even have time to consider playing on PC. And I do think this is the reality of like the gaming on PC thing, that like it's just chronically online weirdos like Grummz simping over like female models in obscure games instead of actually playing new and interesting things. Because I think actual gamers are fired up about Kirby Air Riders. I think actual gamers are excited for Hyrule Warriors. I think actual gamers are hyped for Metroid Prime 4, for Fire Emblem, for Rhythm Heaven, for Tamagotchi. Like, nothing in the next like 10 years of PC gaming is going to match any of that. You know, like, again, like, if you look at the PC Master Race, they're still talking about Elden Ring, not because it's a particularly good game, but because it's the last thing that got that release that got any momentum behind it whatsoever. And what happens? Oh, the sequel is coming to Nintendo Switch 2 as an exclusive. Like, let's just ignore that. Like, like, these things just coincidentally never get talked about, and if they do, they just try and gaslight you into thinking that they're just gonna pirate it anyway. Like, it's just a giant cope. Like, that's kind of my mindset looking at this, is that like everything we see regarding like Nintendo Switch 2 backlash, the idea that Mario Kart World was a bad release, the idea that Donkey Kong Bonanza's DLC was overpriced, the idea that Pokemon Legends ZA was going to be disappointing, that there are no games for Switch 2, that Switch 2 did not win the console war. It's all just a giant cope to deny reality, to deny that Nintendo is a massively successful company that will continue to exist for a long time to come.